Hi there, so today I'm going to work on a painting, something that just grabbed my eye and I decided I'm excited to paint this. I found this painting, this photograph that my friend James Bradley posted as his profile pic on Facebook of him sitting along some kind of little concrete wall at the beach, and I thought this is such a cool photo. And I'm going to move in now, and hopefully this will stay in focus for you, and show you the photograph up close. So you can. Okay, so here's the photo. I think in better focus. I just think it's a very cool, universal sort of a picture that would look great, a lot larger, and as a painting. So that's what I'm going to do today as my painting. 24 by 36 inches, so it's going to be good size. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do in this painting is sketch pretty accurately just James and a little bit where the edges of the wall are. A lot of this painting, a lot of the area is very, it can be very abstracted, and I haven't actually decided whether I want to paint this in oil or acrylic, because it could go either way. I haven't figured out yet what style, what technique I want to use for the look I want to get. I know it's going to be an exciting painting, but so as I sketch and as I get a feel for how it's going to look on this larger size, I'll get a much better idea, I think, and then I'll make the decision whether to work in alkyd oils or in acrylics. So I'm going to work now on sketching by just measuring. I've made my photograph 1/4 the linear size of the canvas. So the canvas is 24 by 36. The photograph is 6 inches high, 9 inches wide. So by multiplying by 4, in other words, if the tip of his nose is 1.5 inches in from the edge, that means it's 6 inches in from the edge of the canvas, that kind of thing. I find it easier for something where it's fairly simple like this, easier than making grids and all that stuff. Just make your photograph, or if it's a reference like a photograph, a nice even multiplier to the size of the canvas. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up. I'm going to measure. I'm going to start doing. Looks like his nose is actually just shy as 2 inches over. So that's 8 inches. Just a little less than 8 inches this way, and down from the top, it is 1 1/8. So that's 4 1/2. 4 1/2 lined up with that. So right there is where that will be. And that's what I'm doing. I'm going to get a bunch of points of different points, tips of his elbows, bottom of his foot, top of his foot, and then I can just sketch in from there. So I'm going to work on that a while and then come back. So I'm getting pretty far along on sketching James in on the picture. And one thing I wanted to point out right now is that this is a case where you really need to trust your measurements, because there's a lot of foreshortening happening here. His legs are coming not straight toward you, but almost straight toward you. So his feet are bigger than they would otherwise be compared to his head, for instance. The leg is back at an angle, so there's very little length here. Because of the perspective, it's all correct, visually correct, and it makes sense and it looks right. But if you try to think, well, how long should a leg be, and just sort of draw things without a lot of checking back to measure, it's going to get all screwed up. So I'm doing a lot of measuring. I measured to the points of where his shoulders are apart, multiplied by 4 because of the relative size. I measured the length of his foot, even kind of got a sense of how far out the side comes. I'm going to measure on the right scale on my ruler. I've switched to a smaller ruler that's a lot handier for this. Okay, the width of that foot here is just over 3/8, so that is just over 1.5 inches wide here. So that's about how wide I want his foot to be. And you know, I can sketch things in like the approximate angle of his toes coming down, that kind of thing. So now I've got my sketch done on the canvas. And there you can see James sitting. I've got the little wall he's leaning back against on the beach sketched in. You can see the original. And now I'm ready to actually get all set up to get the paints out. And I believe I've decided in the course of sketching this that I'm going to do this in the acrylics. Is this something, I don't know. It feels like it doesn't want that kind of juicy, wet softness of the oil paints, although I do want to stay loose and some big brush work on the outlying parts of it. But I'll be able to kind of zero in and more easily do a little bit of more sharpness where he is pretty quickly as things dry very quickly. So I'm going to get on that now, get the paint set up, and go to work with the acrylic paints on this. The first thing I'm going to do as I start painting this is actually a pre-coating thing. I'm going to do, I've got my cadmium red, cadmium yellow, a little bit of the magenta here, and white, and I'm mixing up just a thin, very watered down mix of that. I'm going to do a kind of an orangish thin layer over this whole thing, so thinly that I can easily see my sketching through it. And I could have done that before I sketched it on, but it's so thin and transparent that it works fine like this. I was actually able to see a little bit better to do my pencil sketching with it white, and now doing this over the top. And I'll show you then how you can actually very easily see the whole sketch right through it. And this, so it gives me a tinted ground. Because it's so watered down that it's acting basically as just a very thin layer on top of the gesso. And this will get a little bit more transparent as it dries. But if I zoom in now, you'll be able to see. So you can still see very easily the outline and the details of James. And as that dries and becomes a little bit more transparent, I'll be able to easily follow my marks and just start painting right over that background. Okay, I'm ready to start in now with paints on. I'm going to start with painting the figure of James here. The rest of it I'll work in around it afterward because it's pretty diffuse, subtle, abstracted. The figures are going to be by far most of the work on something like this. So I'm starting out with my palette. I've got my basic colors I always work with: white, cadmium yellow medium, cadmium yellow light, cadmium red medium, magenta, ultramarine blue. I don't even have any phthalo blue on because I really don't think I'm going to need any on this, so I haven't bothered. I've got some black in case I want it. Working acrylics, I've got a container with some water. I've got a bunch of paper towels. I always use a ton of paper towels with acrylics. You're always dabbing your brush off and cleaning it between to some degree, making it more or less wet, depending what you need. I'm going to start out here working with pretty big brushes. It might never go to anything smaller, but I've got a big, kind of old, splayed out 1-inch brush, a 3/4 inch, a newer one, probably do a lot of work with, and a 1/2 inch for when I'm going to get in finer with the details. So I'm going to start in, I like to start in on something like this with the facial features. So basically the skin tones. I'll work on his face, his hands, what's showing of them, his soles of his feet. Because I'm working with the same color. So I'm going to start out working with those areas and then work out from there and try to get him mostly finished before I do too much with anything else. And if I don't have time to finish that today, I don't think I will. If I get the basics of him done, and I can always come back and layer more on top. If I get the basics of his figure done and just some of the background, in case I want any soft, wet on wet blending with acrylics, you've got to do it immediately if you want any kind of a wet on wet. Then tomorrow I can work out from there and get the broader areas done and come back and add more to his figure. So for the skin tones, I'm just going to pick up, this is just a cheap kind of a canvas I'm using for my palette for this. I'm going to mix up just kind of a pile of general skin tones. White, cadmium, yellow, medium, some cadmium red, magenta, a little bit of blue, because we want it to go toward a brownish. We don't want it too orange. You probably can't see on the photo, but with something like this out in the sun, some parts of his skin are actually fairly orange looking, some a little more pinkish. I'm just going to start throwing colors in on sort of mid-tones to start. So I'm looking for mid-tone areas of his face and just putting some paint down. It's like you want to get past that blank canvas thing of being afraid to start. Just throw some paint on there and get started, and then it'll start directing you from there. You'll start seeing what you want to work on next. And just get some paint on. So I'm looking for any area that's kind of not real light, not real dark on his face and on his hands. I mean, on his hands, I'm going to kind of do in some pretty big areas of the hand, and then I'll come in and do the shadows and the highlights over that. So running down his fingers, back to where his hand kind of disappears into his wrist and back into his jacket he's wearing. This hand over here is all you see really is his wrist. We can do that. Before I go to the feet, I think I'm going to keep working on those areas, because with acrylics, if it were oils, I'd just go and do the same on the feet while I'm at it. But I want to be able to work some wet on wet here, and if I go and try to do those big areas with the acrylics, it'll dry before I get to it. I don't want that. I want to be able to do some blending. So I'm going to come in and I want this brush strokey loose. I do not want it to get too tight. This is not about sharp realism. I want this to end up recognizably looking like the person it is, but with a impressionistic softness to it. So even at this early stage, I want to avoid taking too long. I want to slap paint down rather quickly, knowing I can come back to all the later adjusting I want. The point is to keep working fast, avoid getting bogged down in detail. Just ends up costing you time, and you're going to wish later that you hadn't been so detailed, because you're just going to have to try to go back and soften it up. So I'd rather not do it in the first place.